Thanks for tuning in to Men for the Win, a podcast hosted by David Kufis and Dan Thompson, two avid fans who appreciate well-played baseball, especially when it's done by the Twins. Men for the Win is sponsored by the Grand Group with Edina Realty. Are you looking to purchase a new home in the Twin Cities area? Or perhaps you're trying to sell your current home? Whether you're upsizing or downsizing, the Grand Group with Edina Realty will meet all of your housing needs. Contact the Grand Group by emailing thegrand, G-R-A-N, group at edinarealty.com or call them by phone at 612-817-8751. The Grand Group with Edina Realty, 7-time Minneapolis-St. Paul Magazine Super Agent Award winners. On this episode, David and Dan recap the Twins' 4-game series against the Seattle Mariners. Thanks for listening. Enjoy. Thanks for tuning in to Men for the Win. My name is David Kufis. With me, as always, is Dan Thompson. The Twins continue their winning ways, taking 3 of 4 against the Seattle Mariners. Dan, are the Twins ever going to lose a series again?
Out here, people thought the Mariners weren't going to lose a series again, so this was rather humbling for the localish team. I got some flack today for all my Twins gear that I wore. I never get flack for this, but like multiple people are like, oh, you're just rubbing it in? And then I thought, yeah, I am. A couple things, though. So out here, my MLB account doesn't work, right? I can't watch the games because they're blacked out. I'm in Mariners territory. So I spent a lot of time watching the game cast of the MLB, stream for this game. Have you looked and seen how they have like a little people, on the screen that you can see? It's kind of like you're watching like a kid's game cast where there's like a little dot for each position and then they move and things like this. Have you had to watch this?
No, like I'm only familiar with the Gamecast where it shows me like where the pitches come in. They got a whole fielding setup now too.
So like in Game 4 today when I was following along, like when Manny Margot hit that double down the line, like I could see the ball kind of bouncing down the line and like all the dots running around the bases. And then when Pablo Lopez left in the 7th inning, like I stood up in applause. It was like I was there, at the stadium, just watching the dot kind of walk from the mound slowly off towards the Twins dugout.
Well, I mean, last episode you guys talked about the Matrix. That's basically how they would watch the real world in the screen, right? Or the fake world. Yeah. I forget how the Matrix works.
Yeah, exactly. So that kind of made me feel like I was almost watching the game, watching the dots move around. And it was great because you could see it in commercial breaks. Like the outfielders would get together at center field and, have a conversation about what they're going to do afterwards. It was great.
Well, that sounds really entertaining, Dan.
Much more entertaining than watching the real players, obviously.
Oh, clearly. I mean, who would rather watch real players than dots on a screen, Dan? A couple of quick notes here, folks, about the show. So first of all episodes are now available on YouTube. So there won't be video for the full episodes, but all of the audio is available on YouTube. So if that's your primary platform. So hopefully that makes it easier for you to access. And then secondly, some new functionality we've added here, Dan. You can now text the show. So there's a little link in the description that says, hey, send us a text message. And you just click that link on your phone, and then you can shoot us a text. We don't see your phone number. I think we see the last 4 digits. But you can send a question or a comment or whatever. We'd love to have some more listener interaction and respond to questions and whatnot. Send your thoughts our way.
Well, David, the last time you were on the podcast, the Twins were kind of in the midst of their winning streak. And I just think this is funny. This was a 7-13 team just a few weeks ago. Now they're 22-15. They're in second place in the Central. They're a game and a half back from the Guardians, who are 24-14. They're ahead of the Royals, who are 22-16. Detroit's 19-18, and the White Sox got another win today, so they're 10-28. The only division still in baseball with 4 teams above 500.
It's insane, Dan, and it's funny that the White Sox are the ones who beat the Guardians today. How great would it be, Dan, if the White Sox continue to win against Cleveland and take the series? I would love it. We got a note from listener Jeremy, and he said, what was the likelihood that the Twins would get to 20 wins before 15 losses when the record was 7-13? That's pretty insane.
Yeah, I'm sure that somebody's got the betting numbers on that. You would have made a lot of money, I think, if you were betting on this team to get there and turn it around in such a manner. And I think what was great about this series and the Boston series was that they just went 5-2 against some pretty decent baseball teams. This wasn't like they were playing the White Sox and the Angels anymore. So I'm feeling pretty good about where they are. But we have 4 games to talk about, David. I think we better get to it.
Series recap.
Game 1, Dan, this was a nail-biter. Twins come away with this one 3-1, and SWR on the mound, Dan, pitches an absolute gem. 6 innings pitched, only 1 hit allowed, 1 walk, and 8 strikeouts. Dan, I don't want to give you too much credit, because at the beginning of the season and in the predictions show, you had said that SWR was going to come up and have a big impact on this team. My goodness, Dan, Nostradamus over there.
Well, first of all, as you guys pointed out, maybe it wasn't that bold of a pick based on the depth of this Twins starting rotation, but yes, it's hard to say. Simeon Woods Richardson has now made 4 starts. I predicted he would make 15, and he's certainly on line to do that. His season area is down to 1.74. He's pitched 20 2/3 innings. This is pretty good for your 5th starter right now.
I think we'll take it all day, Dan. I think that he's the guy, and I feel bad for Louis Varland, but at the same time, you got to go with the hot hand, and SWR is the guy.
So looking at this game here, something has seemed kind of wrong with Eddie Julian. Now, he finally got a hit in game 4, but he went 0 for 4 with this one with 3 strikeouts. Rocco kept him at the top of the lineup really throughout the whole series, as he has all season. But in this one here, there are big games for Correa and Kepler, who each have a couple doubles. They combined for 4 of the team's 5 hits. Correa doubles in Kepler in the bottom of the 5th to give the Twins a lead. I mean, from there, Jax is able to wiggle out of a bases loaded situation in the top of the 7th with just 1 run allowed, so that ties that. He goes strikeout, sac fly, strikeout, and gets the win. He's now 3-2. Wasn't he last year getting a whole lot of decisions? Like, Jax is always on the mound for interesting things.
Well, it's annoying because he gave up the 1 run that the Mariners scored, and he's the one who gets the victory because the Twins put up 2 in the bottom of the inning. Now, that is the fundamental problem with wins and losses, and we actually haven't talked too much about this, Dan. As the Men for the Win podcast, we have an official wins and losses stats that the wins and losses ought to be put upon the pitchers who had the biggest impact on the game. So in this instance, Dan, had they lost, it should go to Jax, but the win absolutely should go to SWR.
Oh, for sure. Twins do, well, because Jax is on the mound in the top of the 7th, the runs that the Twins get in the bottom of the 7th matter, right? So they get Kepler and Correa on third and second base, respectively, and then Castro grounds out. Now, Kepler gets into a rundown here, which allows Castro to get to second, and then the Twins are able to get a couple runs because Vasquez hits a sac fly to give the Twins that 2-1 lead, and Manny Margot, the guy we never doubted, hits a single up the middle to make it 3-1. Makes me feel a whole lot better going into those last couple innings with a 2-run lead.
But yeah, so the Mariners strike out 14 times in this game, only get 3 hits, and you have a note here, Dan, the Twins in the last 10 games have only struck out more than 9 times once.
And that streak is actually extended because they didn't strike out more than 9 times in any of these games in this series, which brings me to a note. They now rank 12th in the majors in strikeouts. The Mariners are first by 30 over the next team. They have 399. I think it's the Red Sox have 369. And I don't know that it's a coincidence that those are the 2 teams the Twins played most recently.
What's crazy, Dan, the Twins, as early as 4 weeks ago, they could have had 30 strikeouts in the course of 2 games, Dan. I mean, they could have caught up real fast.
I mean, maybe one. You give them a few of those strikeouts on the wild pitches, and maybe the Twins could do it. And just to wrap up game 1, in the top of the 8th, Duran comes in, gets 3 outs there. And then in the top of the 9th, Thielbar goes 1-2-3 for his 3rd save. And so we move into game 2, which was the most frustrating game. This maybe was the most frustrating game, actually, of the whole season for me.
Twins lose this one 10-6. It was a baseball game, Dan, that just a whole bunch of weird stuff happened. And a whole bunch of weird player substitutions were made, and the pitching choices were awkward. But Ober starts the game. He goes 5 innings pitched, only gives up 2 earned runs, has 7 strikeouts, and he looks fine. But so he's pulled, though, at 84 pitches, Dan. And that is where there's probably going to be a little bit of flack sent Rocco's direction in Rocco's Rewind.
Yeah, and then to back up here, top of the 1st, there is some great defense to get a double play, and then Correa has a great play to get Polanco for the 3rd out. Kind of a nice pirouette. This was all over the internet. Just he crossed all the way across second base to get that out. And then the bottom of the 3rd, the Twins rally with 2 outs. Miranda has a single. Julian walks. Larnach with an RBI single. And then Jeffers with a big 3-run home run, which, if you're looking at this series to be a low-scoring series, this seemed like this could maybe even be enough for the Twins to win.
It certainly felt that way. Like, I kind of thought that the Twins had the game in hand at this point and they could get on cruise control. But you have to look at how Rocco has decided to move forward with his pitching out of the pen. But bottom 5, Julian and Larnach are both replaced with Farmer and Margot, respectively. Farmer actually takes a walk on a pitch clock violation, which I feel, Dan, we've seen more pitch clock violation impacts this season than we saw all of last season combined.
Yeah, last season I feel like Alex Kirilloff was always getting pegged for an extra strike because he wasn't getting to the box enough. But yeah, we've had a couple key moments, right? Going back to the Red Sox series. We see some curious bullpen use here. Rocco opts not to go with Jax, Thielbar, or Duran because they pitched the day before, which I feel like he's very inconsistent about. And that leaves the weight of this game on Jackson, Okert, and then Alcala, and they just don't do it. The top of the 7th, Jackson can't get the job done. And then Okert on a 3-2 pitch to Cal Raleigh, pinch hitting, hits a grand slam, and then very suddenly the Mariners have the lead then 6-4.
But the Twins aren't down, Dan. They come back and they tie it. It's the bottom of the 8th. Kepler scores on a play that we're going to talk about later, Dan. We got to talk about this. Kepler scores while there's an injured player down on the ground. I don't feel great about it, but it happened. And then top of the 9th, Dan, clearly, Dan, baseball as an entity, as an organism, knew that Kepler shouldn't have ran home and took its vengeance because basically Rocco hates Alcala and just left him out there and said, you're going to pitch until your arm falls off or until the Mariners score more runs than the MLB will allow.
Yeah, so then the Mariners win this game 10-6 because they score 4 in the top of the ninth. We have lots of questions about how this game ended. The Twins are unable to do anything in the bottom of the ninth, and they lose this one, but I think you could argue that in some ways it actually set up the win in game 3 because they did use all those bullpen arms in what turned out to be a 6-3 Twins victory.
So going on to game 3 then, Dan, bottom 1, bottom 2, Twins get solo home runs from Correa, Larnach, and then Castro for a 3-0 lead, and that will cure a lot of ills, Dan. It sort of felt like 2019 there for a minute when guys are just getting up and jacking homers here, solo shots with nobody on base.
Well, and even a former Twin gets in on it in the top of the 4th when Mitch Garver, who was on that Bomba Squad team, gets the Mariners on the board, but the Twins get it right back when Castro triples in Miranda for a 4-1 Twins lead. And then we see another great start from Chris Paddack, the sheriff, as you don't like to call him. He gets into the 6th, allows 8 hits, 1 walk, 10 strikeouts. But again, this is Seattle, so I feel like all of these strikeout numbers are just a little bit inflated in the way that they were last year, quite honestly, when teams would play against the Twins. The Twins, meanwhile, just struck out 9 times in the top of the 7th. The Mariners get 2 off of Jax. One of them goes to Thielbar because Cal Raleigh, of course, has a 2-out double. And then in the 8th, though, Jax pitches a clean inning, which was much needed. We're going to come back to this a little bit later in the bottom of the 8th, and the Twins get a couple runs. Eddie Julian, who was hitless in his last 4, as we pointed out, singles in the bottom of the 8th to end that streak. He's starting to look a little bit better. And then in the top of the 9th, Duran gets the Mariners to go 1-2-3 for his 3rd save. He hasn't allowed an earned run yet since he came back. And I thought this was interesting because it feels like the Twins are just giving the 9th to whomever. They have 5 players with at least 1 save. Oakert has 1. Sands has 2. Thielbar and Duran each have 3. And then Jax has 4.
Do you think that the Twins media team is sort of annoyed at this great package that they have for Duran and they don't get to use it in save opportunities in the 9th? Here comes Duran in the 6th inning. And they're like, wait, what's happening here? Hang on, we got this package we got to run here, boys.
It doesn't quite have the same ring when he gets like a hold out of it. You know, like that's not quite the same, which maybe I hope there's no contract, incentives for these guys getting saves because it's just kind of all over the place.
The flames, Dan, that's the issue, right? Like you can't have flames on the screen for the 7th inning. Flames are reserved for the 9th inning. Everybody knows that, Dan.
Anyway, we go to game 4, which, I think a lot hinged on this game, right? It's either a split, which is kind of awkward for both teams, I guess, in some sense. It would end both teams' series winning streaks, but the Twins resoundingly win this game 11-1. They get 5 in the bottom of the 1st. We're going to come back to that a little bit later. Miranda, ironically, had an inadvertent bunt that kind of got the whole rally moving. Now, this was weird on the Gamecast. It was an awkward play to try to follow that.
He swung at it, but he didn't. It was like a check swing, so it's one of those excuse me bunts, but it couldn't have been better placed. And like the way that his bat was angled, no one got a good jump on it. And so like the ball is just sitting there in the middle of the infield and nobody has any sort of play on it. And so that led to a couple more runs for the Twins. One issue though, Dan, I will take with this team is specifically when it comes to fielding, shallow pop-ups. Eddie Julian, Dan, I think that Eddie Julian's Canadianness really gets in the way. He's used to the Great White North. And what do they have up there? They have very few people and just infinite space.
Oh, sure.
Right? So Eddie Julian, he sees a shallow pop-up and he's thinking, well, there's only moose out here. I better get out there to catch this ball. Multiple times in this game in particular, for whatever reason, Eddie Julian is basically running a 100-yard dash to try and get under pop-ups, refusing to let the outfield play, Dan. And I don't quite understand what his thought process is there, but he collides with Martin and makes Martin drop a ball, first of all, and then literally like an inning and a half later, he tries to take out Kepler. It's like, Eddie, what are you doing, my friend? You're in the U.S. We have a higher population density.
Well, and to be fair, isn't it the outfielder's ball if he can get to it? Like in every situation like that?
What was so interesting is Royce Lewis was being interviewed during one of these instances, and Royce Lewis is like, he's trying not to throw Eddie under the bus, but at the same time, like he talks about how Buxton's like, hey, if you hear me at all, that's my ball. Like you have to stay away from me right now. And so Royce is basically saying, you really got to be checking behind you to see where that guy is before you even try and make a play on the ball. But I will say too, as a side note to that, Royce Lewis will be a broadcaster one day, Dan. Like I hope that he's healthy and he absolutely destroys this league. But even if he doesn't, if, God forbid that he has a whole bunch more injuries and he doesn't really get playing time in the league, that guy's got a future in broadcasting, no question.
He's also like so ready to just refuse all trainers at this point. Like, that guy wants to be playing right now. Every quote that I get from him is like, well, I feel great, but it's the trainers. But I trust the process. You know, like he catches himself before he gets too far down that road. It's really funny. Anyway, another play at the top of the second, a liner that's hit to Miranda that kind of goes off of his glove, and then Castro catches it. Like, these are the kind of plays that just say, man, it was just the Twins' day.
You know, when you get bounces like this, speaking of the Twins' day, back to Eddie Julian, Dan. It is all about Eddie in this episode, Dan.
Oh, Canada.
But so he's had a rough stretch here. He gets a hit, Dan, that I'm telling you, every single Mariner on the field had a chance at getting this ball. You had the catcher pop up as if it was a bunt. It went past the pitcher. It went past the second baseman. It went past the shortstop. And then the center fielder had a hard time picking up the ball, Dan. Every Mariner on the field had a chance at this ball, but Eddie managed to make it through.
It's that kind of hit that just gets you out of the slumps. I don't know. It's just an interesting game because, and we'll talk a little bit later about Logan Gilbert's poor start for the Mariners. Max Kepler, it's a home run in the seventh that isn't very meaningful.
Vital home run for someone on the show, Dan.
Okay, well then that's actually a great transition into our Puckett's Picks segment.
Catch 'em all, Kirby Puckett!
Puckett's Picks winner.
You missed my clapping, Dan. You missed my celebration while I was gone. Well, lucky you. You get another chance here.
Unbelievable. You win this one. Kepler, this is a high-scoring series, even with 4 games. I know. You had the win here with Kepler with 17 points, which was also the team high, a point ahead of Hogues, who took Jeffers, who had 16. The difference was a catcher interference play that went your way and went against Jeffers. Unbelievable.
Love it. Absolutely love it. Dan took Correa, who had 8 points, and the listeners had Castro in unorthodox picks, but he scored 10 points, which normally, Dan, would put you in the running. But with Jeffers and Kepler absolutely destroying in this series, no chance to catch them. So season standings, then I have jumped into the lead with 5 points. Hogues in second at 4.5, then Dan at 2.5, and the listeners at 2. I love the way things are bouncing right now, Dan.
Interestingly, though, the listeners, despite not being ahead in the wins, they have the most points, 62 for them. Hogues has 61. You have 60, and I'm playing the caboose. I'm at 40 here, well back so far, but it's early. We're a quarter of the way. Let's move on here to the Beast versus Bench.
Beast versus Bench.
Is losing fun? Is losing fun?
Well, Dan, obviously,
Yeah.
Obviously, I am taking Max Kepler. He is always the beast of my heart, Dan, but he goes 7 for 15 in this series. Only 3 RBI, but to be fair, he didn't have a great opportunity to bring in a lot of guys because it seemed like every time he put the bat on the ball, Dan, he was making it to second base at a minimum.
Well, he was leaving opportunities for other guys to bring him in, which they did. I went with Jeffers. You know, what a great series that he had. He's one of only 5 players in, I think, all of baseball with an OPS over 1,000. I mean, this guy is coming through. He's more than just a catcher right now. I mean, there's a reason he's DHing as often as he is, and he's the founder of the sausage as well.
I love that, Dan. Founder of the sausage. My bench is the guy who might as well be batting with the sausage with the way that he fails to make contact. But Christian Vasquez, Dan, goes 0 for 5, 3 strikeouts, 1 sac fly. But I sort of feel like a sac fly, anybody should be able to do that. And like, I know that not everybody can, but my goodness, I know that this team has struggled with strikeouts, but Christian Vasquez, Dan, a guy we're paying $10 million to a year, it's got to be a little embarrassing. Ryan Jeffers, Dan, is making like $2.4 million. like he's making a quarter of what Vasquez is making, and any opportunity the Twins get to have Jeffers catch over Vasquez, they're taking it.
That's what's tricky about baseball contracts, right? Is that, you know, Vasquez kind of earned this years ago, and he's kind of reaping the rewards for probably being underpaid earlier in his career. I mean, the guy's won a World Series, but yeah, he's not doing it offensively. 2 World Series, Dan. Yeah,
2
it's
World
true.
Series.
So I don't know. I don't have an answer for you. But I went with another guy who's not looked good, and it's Kirilloff. Alex Kirilloff was 0 for 9 in this series, and continues to be put at the top of the lineup. And I just wonder, at some point, he's clearly not in Rocco's doghouse, but like, do you have to move him down when he's been in a slump like this?
You know, Dan, it's hard, though, to put a guy who's working with shorter arms than everybody else on the team. It's hard to take away at bats from that guy.
He does have a little bit of a handicap, I suppose, in that way. And I do hope he turns it around. I think he probably will. He looked good in the last couple series, so hopefully it's just a blip. Because we've been wrong about jumping to conclusions about this Twins team before when any of them were struggling. So
us, Dan? We would never.
Never.
You? How dare you?
Well, we have more conclusions here about Rocco here in the Rewind.
Rocco's Rewind.
Well, we're both kind of looking at game 2. And so my critique is that Rocco in game 2 pulled Bailey Ober just too early. You know, you mentioned his pitches. I think he had 84, 85 pitches at that point, and it's a 4-2 lead for the Twins. And I just wonder how this game might have been different if Bailey Ober can give them the 6th, and then it just kind of sets everything back, because they were an inning short in this game, it seemed like. Sands comes in, who maybe they should have flipped this. Sands comes in and pitches a clean inning, but then Jackson can't even get, he gets 1 out. He ends up being tagged with 3 of the earned runs because of Okert's grand slam that he gives up. And then Alcala, who you're going to talk about, just gets left in to just eat sand here. I don't know, at the end of this game. I mean, it was just a really bizarre way to finish. I think this game would have been different if Bailey Ober was given a chance for that 6th inning.
I think that's very possible. So yeah, Alcala threw 48 pitches, Dan, to get through 2 innings. Again, Rocco just leaving him out there to dry. And I guess what I don't understand, Dan, what role is Cole Sands on this team? We've seen him get saves. We've seen him in a high leverage situation. We've seen him in low leverage situations. I have no idea what his role is, but what I don't understand, Dan, is if he's throwing well and he only threw 13 pitches in the 6th inning, give that guy the 7th. If you're willing to let Alcala get out there and literally throw until his arm is limp, let Sands have an extra inning. And I don't know what it is about Alcala that Rocco has an issue with. But even when he sent Alcala down after he hadn't given up an earned run yet, Rocco's like, he's just got some things to work on. I think he's ticked because Alcala didn't cover first on 1 play. And for whatever reason in Rocco's mind, that is the grudge that he will hold on to until the end of time. And he's like, you wanted to succeed in this league. I'm sorry, if you can't cover first, I'm not the guy who's going to let you do that.
Pretty scathing, but it's not wrong. He just has different leashes for different players. It's very weird. And then the other thing that I think, again, we saw in this game, pulling players too early. It's the 5th inning, and you pull Julian and Larnach for Farmer and Margot. You can't do this. I already went on a whole rant about this last series, but do you see this any differently than me? Am I missing something?
No, I think that you have to let your better players play. And I understand when you're dealing with young guys, and sometimes you go with a hot hand and whatnot, when 95% of the time it's going to make way more sense to have Trevor Larnach bat than Manny Margot. Leave Trevor Larnach in, especially if we're talking about the 4th or 5th inning. My goodness.
Yeah, it's just too early. And if it was the reverse, I'm okay with that, right? If you're bringing Larnach in for Margot, then fine.
Well,
but not the other way around.
But then it's interesting that you say that though, Dan, because then it's not a question about pinch hitting. It's just a question about a guy who should be playing more. You see what I'm saying? Like, it's not a question of like, when he's bringing in the pinch hitters. Your argument is the same as mine, which is let the better player play regardless of the pitching matchup.
Exactly. And luckily in game 4, they were able to give guys the day off. Correa didn't have to come in. But you got to think, if it's a closer game, Correa's going to come in for an at-bat in the 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th inning.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Let's keep moving here to Minnesota Moment.
Minnesota Moment.
Well, I guess if we're going chronologically here, Dan, I got to go with Game 3, bottom 8. Adding those insurance runs between Jeffers and Kepler, both with RBI doubles, made me take a step back, let me take a breath, drink some Diet Pepsi, and get comfy on the couch thinking, okay, the Twins are going to win this one, because a 1 or 2 run lead, Dan, just doesn't feel like enough against a Mariners team that when they're swinging the bat well, as we saw in Game 2, they can put up some runs.
Yeah, I totally agree. Those insurance runs were really big. And then, to me, it was Game 4, bottom of the 1st, when the Twins get 5 runs, including, of course, a bases-clearing double from Manny Margot, which I mean, changed the whole tenor of that baseball game. You're going up against Logan Gilbert, who I think came in with the lowest ERA in the American League. He leaves after just 4 innings, 8 earned runs. He had finished at least 6 innings in 7 of his last 8 starts. I mean, this guy was a picture of consistency for a Mariners starting rotation that came into this series having allowed fewer than 3 runs in 21 of their last 22 games. And the Twins scored at least 3 runs against every starter in this series. So it was just very indicative of what the Twins were able to do to this Mariners starting pitching staff in what we thought was going to be a really low-scoring series. Ended up being just as much as they were doing in the last couple.
Well, and we didn't even really talk about Pablo Lopez in Game 4, Dan, but he went 6 in the 3rd, left to the applause, as you mentioned, the 10 strikeouts, but it was Pablo Day, Dan, which there is now a definition of Pablo Day. In case you have been following along in the podcast, there's been some lack of clarity what exactly Pablo Day is. Like, I thought it was a Spanish word for Wednesday or something, and it just happened to fall on that when Pablo pitched on Wednesdays. No, there's no pun. There's no interesting tidbit about Pablo's life and how he always does really well on Tuesdays or something. No, it's just whatever day that Pablo pitches is Pablo Day.
You thought Pablo was Wednesday in Spanish?
I don't know. I was just offering a suggestion, Dan.
Miércoles is Wednesday. Yes, but it would make more sense if it had to land on a certain day.
So me think, why waste time? Say lot word when few word do trick.
I just think, Dan, that like they should put more effort into this, because why don't we call it Joe Ryan Day? Whenever Joe Ryan pitches, it's Paddack Day. Well, okay, Paddack, I bet in some language does mean Friday. It sounds like a word that might as well be a day of the week, Dan.
I think it's just supposed to say something about Pablo's status as a player. But yes, I mean, it does seem almost like unfair to the other guys. Like, when does Joe get his day? You know, when does SWR get his day?
Yeah, it's SWR Day. It's Woods Richardson Day. Why? Because he's pitching. Well, duh. That just means it's a day he's starting. I don't understand the fascination with this. And those jerseys, I loved what Hogue said. The whole Wiener Winner jersey thing that he had from growing up, and he sent us a picture of the shirt. Absolutely loved it.
All right, well, hey, we've got a few more things to talk about here in Maurer's Musings.
I just don't know how it can get any better.
Maurer's Musings.
So, Dan, let's start with yours, because yours is actually more baseball related, and mine's more sports philosophy in general. It's less directly baseball.
So we're about the quarter mark of the season, a little bit early. But who do you think is the team MVP right now? And then who do you think will be, by the season's end, the team MVP?
It's a really tricky question, because right in this moment, I think it has to be Jeffers. I think that he's been the most consistent player. He's on the field all of the time. He calls a great game when he's behind the plate, and he seems to come up clutch in those big moments. And honestly, Dan, I think Correa is going to play a large factor in this season. I think that Royce Lewis is going to come back healthy and absolutely swinging the bat. But I think you got to look to the guy who's been consistent, who's been a leader, and who has ice in his veins, Dan, and hits in the clutch. And right now, I think that's Jeffers, and I think that's going to continue for the season.
What was tricky was not picking Jeffers. Can we make a case for Max Kepler right now, though? I mean, because of what he's been doing lately.
Yes.
So I think because of this is where I'll make my case for Max, is he came back and really helped spark this team on that winning streak. And so I think he has meant a whole lot to from where the team was without him playing well. I mean, he wasn't playing well at the beginning of the year, and then he got hurt. So I'm going to make a case for now for Kepler, but by the end of the season, I hope that it's somebody like Royce Lewis or Carlos Correa, because that means that they have really surged up. This is a good problem to have for this team, but they are kind of hanging on right now to guys like Jeffers, Larnach, and Kepler and Correa, and I hope that they have some more guys augment that and join this conversation.
Well, that's a great segue, Dan, talking about Kepler, because we have to talk about this. Game 2, bottom 8th, Max Kepler hits a double. Carlos Correa flies out. So there's one out. Austin Martin comes up. First baseman is shaded to left field a bit here. Austin Martin puts the ball into play, and he hits it to the first baseman. The pitcher runs over to cover first base, but Martin is absolutely booking it down the line. Martin does the right thing. He slides to the outside of the bag in order to prevent a collision with the pitcher. Well, the pitcher gets injured. And it's weird because you can watch the replay. Cicito is the pitcher, but you can watch that replay, Dan. I'm still not sure when he got injured in this play, because he goes down and you think it's a result of the injury, but then his pain seems to come off of the contact with the ground. I don't really know. I hope he's all right. Whatever. But the issue now, Dan, Max Kepler has advanced to third on the hit to the first baseman. And now the pitcher's on the ground. The ball is out of his glove because he's dropped it due to the injury. The umps don't call time. The ball is still active. Nobody's paying any attention because everybody's watching the injured player on the field, and Kepler runs home. And Kepler runs home because Tommy Watkins is screaming at him to run home. Kepler's watching the injured player, and you can see he feels a bit stuck, and he runs home and scores, Dan. And I think a lot of people were put off by this. I think it's a tricky situation. One, I think the umps should have called time, first of all. Two, I think Tommy Watkins, I understand you want to score the run, but at the same time, like, hey, there's things bigger than baseball that are happening on the field right now. And three, even if Max Kepler feels he should go because Tommy Watkins is telling him to, it's one of those things that's a deep-seated, like, hey, the right thing to do here is not to score this run. Like, I should stay. This should be a dead ball. And so I guess that's my feeling on it, Dan. I guess obviously I'm reading my feelings into what should have happened here. I didn't even ask you the question. My question is, should Max Kepler have run home? I feel he should not have. I feel that the team was punished in the rest of the game due to Max Kepler's moral failings here. But I just think that, like, you need to have a better understanding of what's happening, and again, of what's important. It just didn't feel right, Dan.
He's got to go. He's got to go home.
Oh, Dan Thompson!
Sorry.
Oh my goodness, this is on my list of friendship breaking issues. Oh no, what are we going to do?
I think he's got to go. So here's the quote. So this is what Max said afterwards. He said, I just heard Tommy behind me going, go, 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 go. In a situation like that, I know the ball is live. Obviously, I feel like in the midst of it, it's kind of a jerk move to go when a guy's down and hurt. So I hope that whatever happened to Saucedo, he's not doing too poorly and he recovers well. But yeah, the ball's live. I have to go. But in the meantime, I feel really bad for the guy who's down. First of all, some English teacher taught Max well, because in the rhetorical situation that he was facing here, this is the perfect thing to say, right? Like he pleads, he feels so bad for him, but in the end, he still gets to score the run because this is on the umps. If the umps want to call this dead, then fine, and they can send Kepler back, but he has to force their hand. He's got to go.
I just don't think so, Dan. Here's the thing. I would compare it differently to football because football plays happen so quickly. Like if you're running down the field and you have one guy to beat and you juke him, the play is happening so quick, like you're probably not even going to notice that the guy got injured on the play. Like you're just trying to finish the play out. You're not really paying any attention. This was Kepler saw what happened. He could see the guy on the ground. He could see the ball out of his glove, and you could hear Tommy Watkins yelling at him. Kepler said that he saw it happen. He knew what happened. It's not like Kepler was just like, oh, I wonder what they're doing, why they aren't throwing home.
But
Nobody
he just
seems
said
to be
he
paying
heard
attention
Tommy
to me.
behind him saying, go, go, go. There's no evidence that he saw what was happening on the field.
He knew. Did you listen to the quote you just read? Clearly he knew what was happening, Dan. What are you talking about?
Well, he saw at the time that somebody was down, but he didn't know. Anyway, I think he has to send him. I think this is one of Tommy Watkins' best calls as the third base coach, sending him home.
Sometimes I'll start a sentence and I don't even know where it's going. I just hope I find it along the way.
No, Dan. No, what are you talking about?
He doesn't know that he's hurt. He just knows that he's down and the ball's sitting there and nobody's picking it up.
He doesn't know that he's hurt? What do you think he's doing? They're having a bonfire out there at first base, gathering around the player? What do you think is happening? He doesn't know he's hurt, Dan?
He just knows that
there's
he's
a tea
down.
break? We're not English, Dan. They're not having a tea break here.
You can't
Cream and sugar, London fog. Let's take a little stop here. Well, Max Kepler runs home. I don't understand this, Dan.
Because what if he's faking it? What if he went down?
Oh my goodness. No, this is so stupid. You can't compare it to like the QBs who are faking slides. This is not a question of what happened, Dan. You're trying to make it sound like there was a whole bunch of confusion and nobody knew what was happening. It's clear as day what happened. A guy is on the ground. He's injured. The ball is still live because the idiot umps didn't call the ball dead. Tommy Watkins is screaming at Max Kepler. Max Kepler knows the right thing to do is to stay at third, but he has a coach screaming at him. The devil on his shoulder wins out over the angel who's telling him the right thing to do, and he runs home and scores when he knows he shouldn't have, Dan. You're telling me he feels good about that? If it's the right thing to do, he shouldn't feel bad about it later, Dan.
David Rackley, by the way, was the umpire at first base who didn't make the call. I just think he has to go in that spot and let the chips fall and then let things play out as they did, and the Twins still lost the game anyway.
Yeah, they lost because Kepler ran and scored the run.
That's not why they lost. They lost because Jorge Alcala was left in far too long, and Cole. We've been over why they lost this game. It wasn't because of this play.
No, you're misunderstanding what I'm saying, Dan. I don't know if you're misunderstanding me intentionally.
I understood what you meant. I'm trying to just read it in a different way.
No, you're reading it as if it didn't happen that way, Dan. This is driving me. This is the worst metaphor you've ever made because you're just creating fiction. Dan, you're not making a comparison like it's like this or it's like this. You're saying, well, actually what happened was different than what actually happened. No, you're gaslighting me is what's happening here, Dan.
Gaslighting. I'm really saying he had to do this. He had to go home.
He did not have to go. What are you talking about, Dan?
Why would he have to stop there? I mean, like, if the ball were just laying out somewhere between first base and left field, he would go, right?
Just a bit outside. He tried the corner and missed.
Dan's dumb.
This is the worst take you've ever had on the show, Dan. And you've had some doozies. You once compared Byron Buxton to Nick Punto one week and then Mike Trout the next. This is the worst take you've had on the show.
Can we move on? Are we still podcast
we have to.
friends?
We're at an impasse, clearly. We're going to have to talk about a relationship off air, I guess. My goodness. Let's keep moving here. Series grade.
Series grades.
I'm so upset. You're so wrong about this. It's an A-. Game 2 was just a weird game. Again, the moral implications that Dan Thompson, my goodness, I would hate to be like dying on the side of the road when Dan's like, well, I have a pizza being delivered in a few minutes and I gotta get to the pizza and let the chips fall where they may. My goodness, Dan.
Give my score.
There it goes.
And that was Gardy's gripe.
Who are you
My
ejecting?
goodness.
Are you ejecting you or me? I can't
No,
quite
I'm
tell.
ejecting you for your terrible takes and for leaving me bleeding on the side of the road, Dan.
I didn't do that. Okay, Saucedo's going to be okay. He's just going to be out for a couple months, it sounds like, and then he'll be back.
Whatever. Anyway, game 2 was a weird game. The offense was huge, but some poor fielding, some issues here. Castro not backing up Martin on a play that was a deep fly ball to the left. But they went 13 for 37 with runners in scoring position. And if that sounds like a typo, it's not. They had 37 at bat stand with runners in scoring position, and they hit at a 350 clip. I'm on board with that.
All right, well, I'm going to say a 9 out of 10 advance retreat. It's not quite a sweep, but this is still a series win in 4 games. As far as well-played baseball, game 2 was such a mess that it's hard to give them anything too high with this. But I gave them an 8 out of 10. They stole some bases. They didn't strike out a lot, and they had those clutch hits. So that's a 17 out of 20, which comes out to a B.
Well, I don't even know that we can talk about this next segment. I mean, we have to, but it's not going to go well. Let's keep going here. Herbie's headlines.
I don't know, Jack. It looked like Herbeck pulled him off the bag.
Herbie's headlines.
Okay, you explain what happened, and then I'll explain what your take is going to be before you give me your take.
All right, so
I know exactly what it is.
All right, so this is the question. So how long would a Major League Baseball player get suspended? This was actually, you texted this question. I just wrote it down. How long would an MLB player get suspended if he threw an ice pack onto the first baseline as a guy was going to first? How long do you think he would be out? I asked this question because Jamal Murray in a basketball game for the Denver Nuggets against the Minnesota Timberwolves, who may be ending the streak here, David. This isn't a podcast about basketball, but I tell you, he gets no suspension. He gets like a $100,000 fine. Meanwhile, other people throw basketballs at fans and get 4 games, whatever. So, but in baseball, a gentleman's sport, a sport that has decorum and rule and fair play rules.
I don't even know. Like, I know you're being sarcastic, but your last take, it pains me, Dan. It pains me the way that you're talking about baseball right now.
So how long? How long do you think he gets suspended?
I think MLB would do like a 10-game suspension at a minimum there. I mean, if you're chucking stuff at a guy's feet and he could trip, I just don't understand how a sport could let that go without a larger consequence, where you are doing something, you're not even in the game at that point. Like, that's what I don't understand. You should be treated like, what would a fan would get a lifetime ban from a stadium for doing that. And you didn't suspend a player 1 game for throwing an ice pack onto the floor? Can you imagine what if a guy slipped, tore his ACL? Like, what happens then? Would he have gotten a suspension then? I don't understand this, Dan.
Yeah, I think baseball would have come down a whole lot harder. Again, I guess luckily nobody was, so we don't necessarily even have to go down that hypothetical. But yeah, I think baseball would have punished. I think they should have punished Murray, obviously, in that game too. And so hopefully, again, it won't matter in the series, in the Timberwolves series. But hey, I just thought it was an interesting point. I think what it says is that baseball, I think, maybe takes those matters a little more seriously, but maybe would it have mattered if it was Shohei who was running on first base versus somebody else, or who did it? You know, like...
Well, it was his interpreter, Dan. Don't worry about it.
It never would have been Shohei anyway. All right, well, anyway, for the sake of our friendship, I think we need to move on here to Puckett's Picks.
And we'll see you tomorrow night.
Puckett's Picks.
Well, the listeners, unfortunately, are going to take Max Kepler, taking him away from me. And then you're up next, actually, Dan.
Over the course of the episode, I'm actually much happier with this pick. I'm going to go with Eddie Julien for a couple reasons. First of all, he's going home to Canada. The team he grew up rooting for, as all Canadians do, the Toronto Blue Jays. But second, I do think he's been hitting a lot better. I think he's been making better contact here lately. And so I think if there's a breakout candidate, maybe it's early to take him second, but I'm taking Eddie Julien.
It's definitely early. Hogs is making the logical choice and going with Jeffers. And then I don't really know. I think I got to go with Correa. It just seems like the most logical next pick. And I'm just so sad because I am very convinced that Max Kepler is going to continue this absolute blazing run that he's on.
Well, I hope so. Well, David, since you're back, I think it would make sense for you to send us out here as we head into this next Blue Jay series, which should be another pretty good test against, I know they're a sub-500 team now, but this is a big series. This is an emotional series heading back to the playoffs last year.
Let's do it here, Dan. So, well, folks, if you like what you hear, please tell a friend. You can follow us on X at Men for the Win and find our Men for the Win Facebook and Instagram pages. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast platform so that you're notified when new episodes are available. And if you could leave us a rating or a like, we'd greatly appreciate it. If you'd like to support the show further, you can find us on Patreon. Link in the description. Thanks for listening, and as always, go Twins. That'll wrap up another episode of Men for the Win, a podcast hosted by David Kufis and Dan Thompson, two avid fans who appreciate well-played baseball, especially when it's done by the Twins. Thanks so much for listening, and as always, go Twins.